Welcome back. In the last lesson, we touched on the need for secondary indexes. They can give us more flexibility and better performance when performing certain queries. And for secondary indexes, we have two choices: local secondary indexes and global secondary indexes. Now, on the DevOps doctrine, let's go to DynamoDB. And let's click on secondary indexes. So a secondary index is a data structure that contains a subset of attributes from a table, along with an alternate key to support query operations. A table can have multiple secondary indexes, which gives your applications access to many different query patterns. Let's look at our diagram and understand the main difference. And the main difference is that the local secondary index still uses the same partition key, whereas the global secondary index uses its own partition keys. So the local secondary indexes uses this same partition key, but it gives you a different sort key. Global secondary index uses different partition keys as well as different sort keys. Now, local secondary indexes consume the same throughput, whereas global secondary indexes have their own provisioned throughput. And we'll talk more about provisioned throughput in the next lesson. Now, with local secondary indexes, you can create five per table. You have to keep that same partition key. So, to summarize, with the local secondary index, again, it's an index that has the same partition key as the base table, but a different sort key. Global secondary index, partition key and the sort key is different from those in the table. So let's go over to the management console. Let's go to our tables and let's create some secondary indexes. All right, now let's go back to the reply table and remember that we had a thought that we wanted to query by user. And to do that, we're going to have to create a secondary index. Now, we only have 4 items in this table, but what if we had millions? Well, working with secondary indexes is going to help our performance considerably. So let's go into indexes. Now, here's a key point. This index is going to be a global secondary index. We can't create a local secondary index after the table has been created, but we can with the global secondary index. All right, let's create the index and let's call it posted by. Make sure the type is correct, and it is. It's a string. Now, we can add a sort key, so let's do that. And let's do ID, and that is also a string. Then we have our index name and projected attributes. So these are attributes copied from our table into our secondary index. So these are attributes that will be retrieved in our query. And basically, we can adjust the size of our queries, of what we are returning. So this is the keys. This keys only. Include is keys plus some other attributes, and all, of course, is everything. So this would affect performance. Of course, we have a small table. Let's just go with all. Remember, the global secondary index has its own read and write capacities. So let's go ahead and click Create. So we just have to wait for this to switch to the active status. And note, it's showing the partition key, the sort key. We want all attributes, our read-write capacity, and some other attributes. All right, so our global secondary index is now ready. All right, let's go back to items. And note, when we click on this, it's showing our new global secondary index, and we had one already, so now there are 2. Don't be alarmed if this doesn't appear instantly. Might take a minute or 2. Let's go ahead and do a query. So with our global secondary index, note that our partition key has changed. So let's go ahead and search on user A. And it's convenient that we can see we should expect 3 results. And remember, last lesson, we didn't have this global secondary index. We could not query on posted by. And there we go. Note also that we can search on the sort key. Just being able to eyeball our table, we should now get 2 returned results. And there we go. So that global secondary index is providing us a lot of query power. All right, now let's take a look at local secondary indexes. So let's go back to tables and let's create a new table. All right, we're going to keep the same partition key, going to add a sort key, but it's going to be reply date and time. And let's uncheck default settings. And we're going to create a secondary index. All right, so we want a local secondary index. So what would make this a local secondary index? It's going to have the same partition key. Now we want to add a sort key, and this sort key is going to be different. So let's make it posted by. Let's change our projected attributes to keys only. So we're limiting the scope of our query. And let's click Create as Local Secondary Index and then Add Index. And finally Create. And our table is being created. All right, our table is built. And let's go to Indexes. And there we go. Local secondary index. Now remember, for attributes, we selected keys only. So it's our original partition and sort keys and the sort key we created. All right, now let's check out our query. Of course, we don't have any data in here yet, but there is our local secondary index. There's our original partition key and sort key. We can query on that, or we have our local secondary index. So that's a look at local and global secondary indexes for DynamoDB. And it's good to have an understanding of their uses when preparing for the DevOps Pro certification exam. So with that, we have completed this lesson. Go ahead and mark it complete, and let's move on to the next.